Good evening, folks. Tonight we ride down a rutted, mud-slick road into a village already convinced it dislikes you. It smells like boiled cabbage and faint regret. Chickens shuffle like gossiping grandmothers across the path, and someone somewhere is noisily failing to shoe a mule. A crooked sign welcomes you with splinters and a spelling error. The sky is grey, not with clouds, just with attitude. You are the tax man. Or rather, you are the reason people pretend not to hear knocking. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is. It is always a pleasure to see who is joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You do not ride a majestic steed, you ride something best described as a creature of uncertain lineage, with a gait like uneven spoons in a cloth sack. The locals call it a horse, but they do not say it proudly. It smells like moss and taxes. The saddle creaks ominously, or maybe it is your back. As you approach the first cottage, shutters bang closed with the speed of practiced dread. A dog growls, not because it knows you, but because dogs have excellent instincts. Your job is simple: collect money from people who do not have it, on behalf of people they will never meet. Easy, right? Like asking someone to trade their last loaf of bread for a letter of appreciation from a duke who may or may not be real. In theory, you bring order. In practice, you bring forms, and nothing ruins a nice bowl of pottage like paperwork. A boy, no, a very small and bitter man, eyes you from behind a barrel. He says nothing. He does not have to. The expression is universally medieval for, "Oh, it is you again." You dismount with the grace of someone who has not stretched since the last plague. Your boots hit the ground with a squelch. Congratulations. You are ankle deep in the most common medieval element, mystery mud. No one knows what it is. Everyone pretends it is just earth. It is not just earth. The first home on your list belongs to a widow. Of course it does. She offers a single egg, a sigh, and a look that says she has cursed better men than you. You write it in your book. One egg, possibly resentful, possibly magical. You will not eat it. You will list it under miscellaneous offerings, just below cabbage-related grievances. The rooster perched on the fence post watches you silently, judgingly. It knows what you did. Or maybe it just dislikes your hat. It is hard to tell with roosters. They are the medieval equivalent of suspicious uncles, always nearby, never helpful. Your ledger is the only thing heavier than your conscience. Bound in goat leather and filled with ink smudges and passive aggression, it serves as both record and shield. If someone swings a pitchfork at you, you can block with your accounting. You have, once. It worked, but the ink ran. Taxes in this village are determined by a system that historians have described as flexible, inconvenient, and possibly just made up on the spot. You were told to collect 2 bushels of rye, 1 chicken, and whatever else looks decent. That last part is where things get philosophical. Is a lopsided turnip decent? What about 3 buttons and a poem? The poem was about geese. You accepted it. The buttons you returned. There is always one man in every village who insists he paid already. He gestures vaguely to the west, claiming he gave his taxes to someone who looked like you, but taller. Possibly with more facial hair. Possibly a woman. You nod. You write, "Investigate this nonsense later" in the margins of your ledger. You will not investigate. You will forget. You always do. At the manor house, things are slightly more civilized. by which we mean there are slightly fewer rodents, the steward greets you with the warmth of a wet broom. He hands over a pouch of silver with the flair of someone donating to a very boring cult. You count the coins. One is bitten, one is suspiciously warm. You do not ask questions. This is what is known as professional discretion. Also, cowardice. Back in the village square, someone starts playing a hurdy-gurdy, either in your honor or as a curse. It is unclear. The music is persistent. You take it as encouragement. You collect a wheel of cheese, so hard it may be weaponized. You record it as cheese defensive. One man offers you an IOU written on bark. It is decorated with a sketch of a chicken. The chicken is armed. You accept it, not because it is valid, but because you want it framed. Another villager tries to pay with good intentions. You politely decline. You have already collected those from 3 other people, and they do not fit in the ledger. Somewhere behind the tannery, a small procession passes. 4 villagers carry a log. On the log is a loaf of bread. No one explains. You do not ask. The rooster follows them for a few paces, then returns to watching you. Your cloak is supposed to identify you as an official collector. It mostly identifies you as unpopular. It is dyed a color known as authority beige and is made from a fabric that feels like guilt. You adjust the collar. It does not help. There is an unspoken agreement in tax collection. If someone pretends not to be home convincingly enough, you pretend not to notice. You knock, hear a loud whisper, "Hide the goose!" and then footsteps. You scribble down, "Family currently meditating. Return in spring." The village baker tries to pay in crusts, not bread. Crusts. He gestures at the pigeons approvingly. You decline and receive a lecture about waste. You offer to trade crusts for a receipt written in crumbs. The baker does not laugh. The rooster does. Internally. According to fringe local belief, tax collectors are cursed to never find love or dry socks. You are inclined to believe both. There is a pond near the blacksmith's house that spits mist and secrets. Someone says it knows who will fail their taxes next. Historians still argue whether villagers genuinely believed the pond could predict fiscal negligence, or just wanted an excuse to whisper near water. You sit on a stump to tally the day's haul: 6 eggs, 2 jars of regretful honey, half a turnip, a poem about geese, and a wheel of tactical cheese. You have done worse. You once collected 3 frogs and a spoon that screamed. As evening falls, the village begins to smell more strongly of stew and passive hostility. You head back toward your lodgings, an attic with personality and 1 chair. The rooster beats you there. It is already asleep. You are not surprised. Outside, someone plays a flute badly. Inside, your boots dry by the fire. You open the ledger, dip your quill, and prepare to translate chicken scratch into medieval accounting. The numbers do not match. They never do. You sigh, make a note to blame the weather, and call it a night. The village church is a squat, damp-stoned affair that smells faintly of incense and decisively of mildew. Its bell tower lists slightly to the left, like it gave up trying to be vertical sometime in the previous century. The priest has a nose shaped like a wedge of stale cheese and a disposition to match. He greets the tax collector, formerly you, now just one, with a smile best described as legal. Church taxes, unlike royal levies or local duties, are not so much requested as they are expected. The church does not need to explain itself. It simply arrives with a scroll, a sense of divine entitlement, and a pig. Sometimes several pigs, each holier than the last. There is no official explanation for the pigs, but they tend to wander in at the right moments, sniffing judgmentally and occasionally knocking over candlesticks. One, an elderly boar named Simon, seems to have memorized the entire tithe process and sighs at all the correct intervals. Tithes, in theory, are simple. 1/10 of your produce, labor, or income goes to the church. In practice, they are a game of negotiation conducted through eyebrows, sighs, and passive-aggressive hymns. A farmer claims he harvested only 9 sheaves of barley this year. The priest lifts a brow, the farmer insists. The priest begins singing the opening lines of Dies Irae. The farmer finds a 10th sheaf. Miracles, truly. Sometimes the tithe comes in the form of wool. This is a particular favourite among clergy, who rarely shear sheep themselves but always enjoy complaining about wool quality. This is coarse, they'll say, tugging at a perfectly normal bundle, possibly heretical in texture. One priest once declared a sack of wool was spiritually itchy. No one knew what that meant. He later used it to line his gloves. The church's accounts are kept on long wooden tallies, sticks split and marked with notches that correspond to offerings. One side stays with the church, the other with the tax collector. When pressed together again, the notches should align perfectly. Unless, of course, someone has been notching with ambition. It happens, often. Entire feuds have erupted over whether a barley notch was a barley notch or an oat notch, in disguise. One monk once wrote a treatise on the proper angle of a pious notch. It was largely ignored. A rooster wanders through the nave at midday. No one stops it. It walks slowly past the altar, pauses beneath the pulpit as if reviewing something, then exits through the side chapel. It knows this place. It knows the system. Each tithe day begins with a list and ends with a headache. The list is prepared by the church, inked with elaborate curls and unnecessary Latin. It includes the names of every household, their expected contributions, and several flourishes that seem to exist solely to make the tax collector squint. There is debate, ongoing, exhausting, academic, about whether these flourishes carry meaning. Some historians argue the curls are coded messages from senior clergy to mark troublesome villagers. Others believe the scribes were simply bored. One scholar suggested the flourishes matched the moon cycles. That scholar now studies fish. A peasant named Norin brings in a jar of honey so dense it reflects the candlelight like polished amber. He claims it counts as 2 tithes. The priest sniffs. The collector nods. The jar is placed on a shelf already populated by dusty pears, ambiguous roots, and a wheel of cheese carved with scripture. No one remembers who brought the cheese. It hums faintly at night. The church also collects less tangible offerings, labor, for example. Villagers are expected to help with repairs, gardening, and occasionally standing in solemn lines during feast days. One year, the bishop required 30 men to process around the town, holding loaves of bread overhead. No one was told why. The loaves were not eaten. A dog ran off with 2. The rooster attended perched atop the sacristy roof, watching like a feathered supervisor. One priest attempts to tally a sack of apples by rolling each onto the stone floor and counting the bruises. It is not an efficient method. Another tries to gauge tithe quality by taste. This leads to a brief controversy when he declares the honey too cheerful and demands something gloomier. The beekeeper is confused. The bees are not consulted. Church pigs, it turns out, are tax exempt. This is not written anywhere official, but no one dares to tally them. One collector tried. He followed Simon the pig into the vestry with a notched stick and a brave heart. Simon sat on his foot. The collector left with a limp and an understanding that some lines are not meant to be crossed. An old superstition, still whispered in corners and by people who own too many spoons, holds that improper tithing leads to spontaneous goat infestations. No one has ever documented this happening. That has not stopped villagers from dramatically blaming goat appearances on overdue apples. We gave late, they say solemnly, and now they eat the curtains. The priest nods gravely. The collector writes goat-related concerns in the ledger. The issue of livestock tithes remains contentious. Cows are obvious, chickens are inevitable. But pigs, especially ones with ecclesiastical tendencies, cause problems. Can a pig gifted to the church later become lunch? The answer is yes, but only if you are very hungry and very discreet. One deacon once cooked a holy pig and claimed it had ascended. The bishop was not amused. The pig, one assumes, was not consulted. Villagers occasionally attempt tithe substitutions. We have no grain, they say, but here is a fine comb. Or, we are oat poor, but onion rich. Would the Lord enjoy onions? The church sometimes accepts. Sometimes it scowls. Once, a family offered a mural of St. Jerome painted on a door. The priest accepted. The door remains in the choir loft, occasionally creaking during sermons. The rooster returns in the late afternoon and stands directly on a pew. It does not move for an entire reading of St. Matthew. When the sermon ends, it crows once, softly, like punctuation, and exits. The priest watches it go. A loyal congregant, he murmurs. Records must be kept, of course. The collector's version of events is always slightly different from the priest's. Where the church notes one goat, humble in spirit, the collector writes goat, surly. Where the church notes 3 sacks of wheat, the collector adds possibly rye, 1 torn. These ledgers rarely agree, but they are both correct in their own way. And they both serve one key function, protection. If a bishop complains, you show him the book. If a villager objects, you show him the other book. No one is ever satisfied. At dusk, the church receives its final tithe, a carved walking stick, presented with great ceremony by a man who claims it once belonged to a saint. The priest squints. The tax collector records it under objects of uncertain value. The walking stick smells like pickles. No one asks why. The air grows colder. The pews empty. The candles gutter. Outside, the mist creeps low, swirling around the headstones with theatrical flair. The church door creaks shut. Somewhere, Simon the pig snuffles in his sleep. The tally sticks rest on their shelf, slightly askew. The ink dries on the ledgers. And in the corner, by the old stone baptismal font, the rooster dreams in silence. Barley does not seem dangerous at first glance. It is a grain. It grows, it rustles politely in the wind. It is beige. And yet medieval tax collectors understood that barley had the uncanny ability to transform a perfectly normal morning into a local uprising, especially when measured in front of witnesses who had not eaten breakfast. The problem was not the grain itself, it was the measuring. No 2 sacks weighed the same. No 2 peasants agreed on what constituted a full bushel. Some insisted it should be measured dry, others damp, and one man demanded it be judged by the emotional potential of the harvest. You wrote that down in the margins. You were not proud of it. The official measuring device, of course, was the bushel basket, a wooden container that never held quite the same amount 2 weeks in a row. One collector's basket swelled mysteriously in the summer. Another's shrank during Lent. One cracked in half after a pigeon sat on it. Nothing about barley was stable, except that someone would argue about it. At sunrise, you arrive at the granary. It leans left like everything else here. The door is ajar, possibly from wind, possibly from attitude. The miller greets you with the exhausted look of someone who has already argued with 3 people today and suspects you will be the 4th. He gestures at the sacks of grain. You glance at your list, 10 bushels due, 1 bonus sack from last year's failed audit, and a note about payment being in kind. No one knows what that last part means. You assume it involves more barley. A rooster is standing on the granary roof. It does not crow. It merely watches. If it had arms, they would be crossed. Your measuring begins. You scoop, pour, level, and weigh. A crowd forms, as it always does, because there is no better entertainment in this village than watching a man try to measure something while others question his soul. A woman gasps when you pat down the top of the barley with your hand. "That's theft," she whispers. You offer to let her pat it herself. She declines, but narrows her eyes. An elder insists the grain should be judged by scent. You raise an eyebrow. He leans in and sniffs a sack deeply, then declares it to be suspiciously generous. The rest of the villagers nod. One starts mumbling something about the weather. You begin to understand why rebellions start with taxes and end with people being chased out of barns. There is, oddly, a fringe belief in some villages that barley contains spiritual memory. The idea is that grain absorbs the mood of those who harvest it. If the workers were cheerful, the grain will be bountiful. If someone stubbed a toe during threshing, the entire crop is cursed. It is not a widely accepted theory, but it is brought up just often enough to make measurements awkward. You record 3 bushels, though you are fairly sure one was filled halfway with oat husks and despair. The miller shrugs when questioned. "It's settled," he says. You do not believe him. But you also do not want to be trapped here all day, debating the moral fiber of a cereal grain. One farmer has attempted to improve his grain count by drying his barley over a fire. It now smells faintly of smoke and extremely of regret. He insists it is light and fluffy. You write crispy in your notes and hope no one tries to cook with it. A local woman appears with a barrel full of what she claims is barley, but upon closer inspection contains at least 20% dried beet tops. You point this out gently. She glares. "We call that flavor," she says. The crowd murmurs approvingly. You write blended in the ledger and move on. By midday you have collected 8 full bushels, 3 questionable ones, and 1 sack of something that may be sand. The rooster has moved closer. It now stands beside the empty measuring basket, as if ensuring neutrality. Someone jokes that the rooster is the only honest creature in the village. No one laughs. It is not a joke. A brief scholarly debate once erupted over how medieval tax collectors dealt with barley inflation. Not economic inflation, but physical. Barley swells when stored improperly. It breathes, it puffs, it expands, like it knows it is being judged. One monk insisted that all grain should be measured after 2 days of moral rest. Others preferred to beat the sacks with sticks until the barley settled. One collector simply yelled at it. You do not yell, you sigh quietly and move to the next farm. This one has a goat. The goat does not pay taxes but is loudly invested in the process. It attempts to climb into a barrel of grain twice. When denied, it settles for eating a corner of your ledger. You do not stop it. You needed a reason to stop tracking the beet barley blend anyway. The farmer here is well prepared. His grain is pre-measured, stacked neatly, and labelled with chalk. Each sack bears a cheerful note, 1 honest bushel. You are suspicious. No one is this ready. Upon opening the first sack, you find that it is exactly correct, down to the ounce. You are unnerved. You ask if he has done this before. "I was a clerk once," he says. You nod, and both of you say nothing more. The rooster follows you again, this time walking slowly between sacks like it is performing a final inspection. You offer it a bit of barley. It does not accept. Perhaps it has standards. Late in the day, an elderly woman arrives with a single handful of grain. "It is symbolic," she says, "a tithe of spirit." You thank her, accept it with due ceremony, and deposit it into your coat pocket, where it joins 3 pebbles and an old receipt for cabbages. It is, somehow, the most honest tithe you have received today. You are informed that one family cannot pay. They have had a rough harvest, several sick chickens, and a windstorm that rearranged their roof into the neighbor's garden. You nod sympathetically and mark delayed beside their name. In truth, you do not expect to collect anything next year either, but you like their honesty. They once gave you cider during a frost. It was terrible, but it was warm. An argument breaks out over whether one particular sack was due for this year's tithe or left over from a previous debt. The farmer insists it was held in trust. You insist it is dusty. The rooster walks between you and stands on the sack. That settles it. By sunset, the measurements are complete. You have 19 bushels, or something approximating 19, depending on your tolerance for beet flavor and ambition. Your ledger is heavy with notes, clarifications, and one page stained with what you hope is cider. You return to your lodging, where the fire smoulders and the air smells faintly of ink and damp wool. You remove your boots slowly, each squelch a small betrayal. The rooster is already roosting in the rafters. You do not question this. Tomorrow it will be butter, or maybe wool, or possibly turnips if the peasants are feeling bold. But tonight it was barley, beige, infuriating, stubborn barley, counted with care, collected with skepticism, measured under the watchful gaze of a silent, incorruptible rooster. The king, in all his brocaded, crown-heavy glory, rarely descended from his high seat to personally request your coins. He had people for that, people like you, or rather, people slightly above you, who sent instructions to people slightly below you, who then showed up in villages holding scrolls that smelled like old parchment and dread. Somewhere along that chain, you were handed a list and a deadline, with the strong implication that failure would result in a decrease in both job satisfaction and head height. Royal taxes had range. They could be coin-based, crop-based, animal-based, or, as one famously confusing missive once ordered, best assessed by the situation and the scent of the household. No one ever figured out what that meant. The collector who tried ended up accepting a basket of onions and a very nervous cat. He later claimed it was accurate. The cat declined to comment. Today's assignment begins at dawn because royal taxes are fond of sunlight and punctuality. You saddle up your tired mule, who has been downgraded from mount to participant, and trudge through slushy ruts toward the manor. The sun is not quite up. The rooster is. It passes you on the road without making eye contact. The village manor is a slightly grander pile of wood and wattle, with a door that opens inward, and a steward who opens outward, arms flung dramatically, as if welcoming good news. Upon seeing you, he lowers his arms and calls for wine. You suspect this is not for celebratory purposes. You unfurl the royal tax list. It is written in cramped script and royal optimism. 10 silver coins from the smith, 2 goats from the cooper, 1 cow from the village collectively, and, curiously, 1 fine item of wearable craftsmanship from a man of standing. That last one has caused no end of creative interpretations. The smith is first. He meets you in a leather apron and a scowl wiping soot from his hands like it owes him money. He does not have 10 silver coins. He does, however, have a bar of iron shaped suspiciously like a coin mold. You pretend not to notice. He offers 6 actual coins and a promise that the rest are in progress. You accept and add a note. Smith partial, possible forgery underway, looks confident. From the cooper, you are given 2 goats. One is docile, the other has strong feelings about your cloak. You mark them as acceptable but temperamental. The cooper tries to throw in a 3rd goat, clearly ill, claiming it as a loyal companion to the others. You decline. The rooster, observing from the fence post, nods once. You feel mildly vindicated. Then comes the communal cow. This is always a discussion. The villagers gather in a loose circle, speaking in low voices about fairness, dairy production, and whether the cow in question even belongs to the village. One man insists it is a sacred cow. Another claims it wandered in last spring and has simply not left. A third suggests drawing lots, then begins drawing them before anyone agrees. Eventually, a compromise is reached. The largest, grumpiest cow is selected. She does not enjoy being volunteered. It takes 3 ropes, 2 bribes, and 1 overturned cart to move her. You record the transfer with the note, "Cow aggressive, possibly political." Now comes the most puzzling entry, the wearable item. You begin by asking the steward if he has anything ornate. He offers a boot. Singular. The other was stolen by a dog. It is embroidered, yes, but smells like ambition and turnips. You take it. Not because it is acceptable, but because you suspect refusing will lead to a philosophical debate about footwear that no one has energy for. Later, a weaver offers you a sash embroidered with royal symbols. He claims it belonged to his uncle, who was once mistaken for a noble at a distance. The sash is surprisingly nice. You accept it. The boot is quietly left behind on a windowsill, where it will slowly be claimed by moss. You also receive a hat. No one requested a hat, but it is offered with such hope that you take it. It is made of felt and poor decisions, and it droops to one side like it gave up halfway through existing. You add "gifted hat, unclear origin" to your notes. The rooster perches on a fence and preens. According to at least one fringe belief, royal taxes must include a sacrifice of pride, meaning that every person should part with something mildly humiliating. It is not official policy, but it explains the number of villagers handing over half-finished socks, cracked mirrors, or personal poems about rivers. You accept them all because the alternative is asking questions. The miller gives you a sack of flour and a warning: "Tell the king this is the good stuff." You doubt the king will personally inspect it, but you nod. The flour is surprisingly fine. You wonder briefly if he kept the bad stuff for himself. You decide not to ask. A man with an eye patch offers coinage of a personal nature. This turns out to be 4 copper tokens from a fair that no longer exists. He insists they once purchased the best eel stew in the region. You accept them with a raised brow and note them as nostalgic, non-functional. The question of coinage itself is a mess. Medieval coins were often clipped, filed, or just counterfeit. One collector famously tried to weigh every coin by hand and went mad after the 3rd pouch. You rely on instinct. If the coin jingles convincingly and does not collapse when bitten, it counts. You once received a coin made of pewter and gilt. You accepted it, regretfully. The rooster follows you down the road as you count coins on a stump. The sun is high, the air thick with peat smoke and faint unease. You tally 12 silver, 8 copper, 1 carved button, 2 possibly acceptable goats, 1 livid cow, a sash, a hat, and a boot you are pretending does not exist. You consider whether this qualifies as a successful royal tax day. It meets the technical definition, which is no blood, some coins, livestock that can stand. You nod, you make a note. You pack the silver in a pouch that definitely needs mending. Royal taxes are rarely collected in one day. There is always someone who fled to the woods, someone who claims religious exemption, and someone who just stares at you until you go away. Today the woodsman is gone. The monk claims all worldly goods are already God's, and the baker stares you down while slicing bread with violent precision. You write to be followed up and move on. At dusk you rest at the edge of the village. The cow has eaten half your sleeve. One goat is now named Ethel, apparently. You do not know who named it, but the name seems to have stuck. The rooster has claimed the cart as its throne. You accept this. The village grows quiet as windows shutter and smoke curls upward from hearths. You review the list one last time. You are short by 2 coins, 1 item of value, and a vague promise of gratitude. You suspect only the first 2 will be noticed. You consider offering the rooster as tribute. You immediately take it back. Some lines must not be crossed. You prepare the tax parcel, pouch sealed, livestock tethered, miscellaneous objects wrapped in cloth. It is a strange bundle, but it represents the kingdom's grip on the farthest corners of its realm. And you, its very sleepy fingers. Tomorrow you deliver this to someone who will raise an eyebrow and file it in a box labeled MISC. For now, you roll into your blanket, lean against the cart, and let the fire crackle nearby. The rooster sleeps beside the silver pouch. 1 goat snores. The cow eyes you resentfully. The hat slips from its perch and lands on your face. And somewhere far away, in a castle with walls thicker than your patience, a king dreams of coin, never knowing that today his treasury increased by 1 sash, 2 goats, and a poem about eels. Officially, a medieval tax collector was supposed to dress in a way that conveyed authority. Not opulence, not comfort, just enough visual dignity to suggest that this person, standing in your yard with a quill and a pouch, could speak on behalf of someone who owned armies. Unfortunately, the available fabrics of the time had a hard time saying authority. Most of them said mild rash. You began your morning in the usual way, scratching at the wool collar of your designated collection tunic. It was the shade of damp parchment and roughly the same texture. Some say it was once beige, others say it was never truly a color, just a mood. It smelled like storage, suspicion, and a faint hint of vinegar left over from last week's turnip incident. The cloak, which technically designated you as a government agent, was heavier than most grievances and twice as difficult to fold. It draped over your shoulders with all the enthusiasm of a wet dog, and though it was trimmed with something once described as fur, no one could identify the animal. A popular theory is that it was goat. A less popular but more accurate theory is that it was curtain fringe. A silent rooster walked past your boots as you adjusted your belt. It did not stop. It had seen this cloak before. It had thoughts, but it was too early to judge. The belt itself served no real function. It held nothing, fastened nothing, and sagged under its own decorative weight. It was there to imply you had a sword, or at least a stern letter. In truth, it held a small pouch filled with broken chalk, a spare quill, 2 buttons, and a pastry of unclear age. This was not glamour, this was survival. Boots are important when walking from one hostile doorstep to another, but yours had long given up their original purpose. Once made of leather, they now consisted of 3 parts hope and 1 part string. One had a flap that refused to lie flat, giving you the appearance of limping with attitude. When you passed a reflective surface, a rare treat in muddy villages, you noticed they made your legs look both shorter and somehow disappointed. Your hat, the final insult, was meant to be a wide-brimmed felt creation indicating civil service. What it actually did was collect rain, every drip of it. The brim curled upward like it regretted everything. Once, a bird nested in it. You let it finish. You did not have the energy to fight for dignity. The villagers watched you approach, always. They watched what you wore as much as they listened to what you said. Authority was not just declared, it was embroidered, dyed, and worn with passive discomfort. And your wardrobe suggested a man who had misplaced his dignity and found a replacement in the discount pile. There was once a debate among stewards about whether tax collectors should wear colours that matched the monarchy's heraldry. Some favoured blue and gold, others claimed green conveyed firmness. One ambitious scribe suggested crimson. He was sent to the coast to collect fish taxes and never returned. The final decision was made by someone with a fondness for practicality. Dress him in something no one would want to steal. Hence the cloak, hence the tunic, hence the hat that doubled as a basin in emergencies. The local reeve greeted you today with a glance at your sleeves. They had patches, not matching patches. These were improvisational. One was clearly from an old apron, the other might have once been curtain lining. You told him it was regional fashion. He nodded, unimpressed. As you walked the lanes, a childless old woman pointed to your boots and muttered something about the mark of the turnip taxer. You didn't stop. You'd heard worse. Last week, someone asked if you had stolen your coat from a monk with gout. You had not, but the resemblance was noted. Fringe belief in some areas claimed that tax collectors wearing torn clothes would bring bad luck to the harvest. Others thought the opposite, that the more ragged the collector, the better the yield. One particularly philosophical goat herder once told you, "If your hat sags, the barley blooms." You thanked him and updated your ledger accordingly. It didn't help the hat. You passed the blacksmith, who nodded at your cloak and said, "Still hanging on?" You nodded back, unsure whether he meant the garment or your soul. Mid-morning brought rain, as it often did, and your outerwear responded with its usual absorption ritual. Within moments you weighed 4 pounds heavier and smelled like wet parchment. A boy you passed offered you a dry leaf. You accepted it with solemnity. It was the best gesture you would receive all day. There is a rooster on the edge of the mill roof, watching you again. Its feathers are dry, its expression unreadable. It shifts slightly as if to say, "I would not have worn that." Inside the bakery, the baker offers his taxes in the form of 2 loaves of bread and a pointed glance at your cuffs. "Been busy sewing again?" he asks. "Fashion waits for no man," you reply. He does not laugh. Every stitch tells a story. The missing button on your tunic told of a run-in with a sheep cart. The elbow patch came from a tavern curtain you once traded for silence. The dark stain on the hem, it told a story involving spilled ink, an excitable goat, and a rather optimistic attempt to copy 3 ledgers at once. You once met another collector whose wardrobe was enviably clean, crisp lines, polished boots, a hat that remained upright. You hated him immediately. He claimed to iron his documents. You suspected he ironed his soul. At the church steps, you slip slightly, your heel catching on a loose cobble. The friar catches your arm with unexpected grace, and then grimaces as he touches your damp sleeve. "Ah," he says, "still wearing that?" You nod. He does not ask why. There are no uniforms issued by the Crown for this job. You piece it together, slowly, regretfully, creatively. One collector once wore 2 different shoes for 3 years. He said it made him more memorable. He was eventually remembered for the wrong reasons, namely being chased out of town for collecting tithes on Sundays. A village tailor once tried to gift you a new tunic. It was blue, lined with pride, and 3 sizes too small. You accepted it anyway. It hangs in your lodging, reminding you what ambition looks like when stitched too tightly. At midday, you shelter under a tree. The rain has shifted from dramatic to personal. You wring out your sleeve into a nearby shrub. The rooster joins you beneath the canopy, feathers fluffed, unimpressed. It does not acknowledge you. You both know it looks better. You make a mental note to patch the cloak again. The back flap is fraying. You could replace it entirely, but then who would recognize you? Who would point and say, "Here comes the fellow who looks like a soggy upholstery sample"? The paradox of your appearance is simple. You must look just dignified enough to be official, yet pathetic enough to avoid robbery. And so you walk the tightrope of wet wool and faded stitching, balancing on the edge of authority and apology. By late afternoon, the wind picks up. Your hat departs with little resistance. You chase it briefly, then decide to let it go. Some things are meant to be free. You conclude the day's visits with a sack of damp flour, 3 turnips, and a copper token of questionable origin. You wrap them in your cloak, which protests by absorbing more rain. The rooster walks beside you as you return to your attic room. It says nothing. You understand each other. Inside, you hang your garments near the fire. They do not steam. They smolder slightly, then sulk. You sit in your chair, watching your boots dry in slow misery. The sash you received 2 days ago as a royal tax glints mockingly from its hook. It is bright. It is clean. It does not belong to you. You sip thin cider and open your ledger. One page flutters loose. It has been damp too long. You press it down with a boot. The ink bleeds slightly, like the page itself has had enough. The rooster hops onto the windowsill, perches, and closes its eyes. You look down at your sleeves. Another patch needed, another bit of thread, another small surrender in the name of tax enforcement. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, you sigh. In the realm of the tax collector, clothing is not armor. It is a flag of exhaustion, of reluctant duty, of quiet suffering stitched at the seams. And tomorrow you will wear it again. Feudal dues were not taxes, technically. They were obligations, a delicate feudal sort of word, like favors, except less voluntary and more likely to involve poultry. And they were not always measured in money. In fact, they were rarely measured in money. They were measured in time, in labor, in barrels of ale you were meant to pretend were full when they absolutely were not. The day begins with a summons from the local manor steward. A long scroll has arrived from the lord, who is, of course, nowhere near the manor itself. He is off at court, or in the next county, or possibly just hiding from his own financial decisions. His handwriting is florid, his expectations deeply unrealistic, and his understanding of agricultural seasons purely decorative. The scroll says, "Collect all outstanding feudal dues from the villagers of Bering Hollow." Outstanding is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Some of these dues date back 3 planting seasons, and at least one incident involving a runaway plough. You start with the simplest demand, labor. Every villager owes the lord a certain number of work days per year. This is called boon work, which sounds cheerful, until you realize it involves hoeing rocks for someone else's barley. Today's labor includes fence mending, hay stacking, and, optimistically, roof thatching, though no one remembers how to do that properly. The thatch keeps falling off and becoming nests. You arrive at the fields where 5 villagers are trying very hard to look busy. One is moving hay from one pile to another. One is hammering a post that no longer exists. The third is asleep, face down in a turnip row. The fourth is the rooster, who appears to be supervising. You pull out the list. It's been damp since April, so the ink is smudged, and one name now looks like Gregory the Comma. You decide not to question it. A man approaches with a wheelbarrow full of soggy straw. "This counts, right?" he asks. You squint at the straw, which is wet, compressed, and seems to be developing its own ecosystem. You nod. He rolls it off, triumphant. Another offers a piglet as his feudal due. You check the scroll. Livestock in place of labor is technically allowed. You accept the piglet. It immediately runs under a cart and refuses to emerge. The rooster follows. The piglet exits. The rooster does not. You decide that counts as a contribution. A woman hands you a bucket and says, "Water for the manor." It is half full of mud. "Symbolic," she adds. You write down, "water interpretive." One fringe belief in the region holds that labor given without proper gratitude invites curses. Specifically, curses involving mildew, toothache, and dreams where one's hair is stolen by bees. As a result, villagers insist you say "thank you" after every task. Loudly? You do. One man refuses to finish stacking hay until you thank both him and his cart. You oblige. The haystack collapses anyway. He blames you. You blame gravity. The rooster says nothing. Then come the Heriot dues, a cheerful bit of posthumous taxation. When a tenant dies, the lord is entitled to claim their best beast. This tradition is rarely popular and never convenient. You have to assess the estate, select the best animal, and collect it without making eye contact with the grieving family. Today's Heriot is a horse, technically. It's missing 2 shoes and half an ear, but it's the tallest animal on the property. The widow points to the ox instead. That one still works, she says. You remind her the horse qualifies. She reminds you that the horse once walked into a river for no reason. You both agree to pretend the ox is older than it looks. You write, collected, questionable ox, widow persuasive. You leave the horse where it stands, gazing at a fence post with what might be nostalgia. There is also merchant, a fee paid when someone's daughter gets married. It is supposed to compensate the lord for losing a labourer. It also functions as a quiet form of social interference. No one likes it. No one talks about it. Today, a man offers a barrel of cider as payment. It is half full, very tart, and buzzing faintly. You accept it, partly for the record, mostly for the effort. The term due appears in a dozen different formats on your scroll. Due in labour, due in eggs, due in good faith. That last one is the hardest. Good faith is not easily measurable, especially from a man who once paid in a potato with a face carved into it. The scroll also demands scutage from one landholding peasant who avoided military service. Scutage is payment in place of going to war. The man offers 3 cabbages and a fish. I wasn't going to fight anyway, he says. You write, scutage, reluctant produce. You assume the fish is fresh. It smells decisive. You pass the reeve on your way to the manor storehouse. He eyes your pouch, which now contains feathers, a beeswax candle, and a letter from someone named Wilma, possibly fictional. He says, light load today. You nod. Emotionally, very heavy. Some dues are impossible to collect. One family claims they paid their hay fee in a dream. Another says they traded their obligations with a man in the woods. You make a note. Liability transferred to forest stranger. Technically invalid, but it sounds ominous enough to leave alone. The issue with feudal dues is that they were never codified. They shifted with the land, the custom, and whoever remembered what from last year. Historians still argue whether half of these obligations were ever enforced, or whether collectors just kept adding things to the list until someone stopped them. No one ever stopped you. The rooster is now inside the storehouse, perched on a barrel of turnips. You suspect it has opinions on the current accounting system. You try to balance the ledger on your knee. It reads like a poem written by a cabbage. Hay, partial, piglet, escaped, widow, persuasive, cider, possibly weaponized, candle, ornamental. You once met a collector who tracked dues with stones in a pouch, 1 stone per task completed. When asked how he remembered what the stones meant, he just tapped the side of his head and said, instinct. You later found him trying to pay a bishop with gravel. Lunch today is dried bread and mild despair. You sit near the manor's duck pond, which smells like ambition and algae. A servant walks by with a sack labelled dues, Misk. You ask what's inside. He shrugs. Mostly promises. You believe him. Feudal dues also include aid, an occasional contribution demanded during major events like the lord's daughter marrying or his cat falling ill. There is currently no occasion, but the steward collects aid anyway. For future festivities, he says. You receive 3 jars of something labelled festive jam. You do not ask. The rooster eyes the jam. You put it in the cart. slowly. By mid-afternoon, your records are mostly complete. You are missing a Labor Day from a man who has gone to the woods to rethink his loyalties. You suspect he is just napping behind the chapel. You let it go. There is one final due, riding duty. One villager is supposed to provide a horse and rider for the Lord's messages. The villager in question offers a mule and a letter opener. Symbolic, he says. You write, symbolism accepted. As the sun dips, you submit your day's collection to the manor. The steward flips through the ledger with the expression of a man reading a recipe in a dead language. He pauses at the scutage note. Fish, he says. Yes, you reply, with intent. He says nothing further. You hand him the piglet, who immediately escapes again. You both pretend not to notice. You return to your attic with a feather in your hat, not metaphorically, it blew in during the collection. You peel off your cloak, which now smells like fermented jam and hay, and settle into your rickety chair. The ledger is damp again. The rooster is already asleep, its head tucked under a wing, guarding the last jar of festive jam. You tally the untallyable, note the unnotable, and write one final line at the bottom of the scroll. Dues collected, yes. Details, no. Rooster, present throughout. The ledger is not a book, it is a burden. Bound in stiff hide and roughly the weight of a satisfied goose, it rides with you wherever taxes are to be tallied. You do not write in it, you inscribe, carefully, slowly, as if each line could one day be used against you in a dispute involving goats, coin, or ecclesiastical disappointment. The pages are thick, off-white, and smell faintly of garlic and mildew because of an incident involving storage near a kitchen and regret. The ink is a mix of iron gall and local resentment. Your quill is unevenly trimmed because the last decent one snapped mid-entry while documenting an unusually combative tithe of beets. Today begins as all good accounting days do, with spilled ink and an accusatory rooster. The rooster is already on your desk, standing squarely on the page, titled Partial Barley Returns, Village of Turnsby. It has not moved in some time. You suspect it has taken a personal interest in agricultural record-keeping. You ask it politely to move. It declines. The ledger is open to a section known as the Great Mistake, a tax record from 3 seasons ago misinterred in haste, perhaps with slightly too much cider in your system. Instead of recording 2 carts of hay, you recorded 2 cats and hay, which triggered a chain of events involving feline confusion, a suspicious barn fire, and one farmer who refuses to speak to you to this day. You draw a neat line through the error. The rooster pecks at it disapprovingly. Each page is a landscape of columns, notes, crossouts, and annotations in your own increasingly jagged script. You once tried to write neatly, but after 3 winters, 4 disputes over poultry weight, and 1 tax audit conducted in a hailstorm, your handwriting has evolved into something best described as functional chaos. There is no standard system. Every collector has their own style. You met a man once who recorded taxes in verse. Another used drawings. One innovative soul used smell, small sachets with herbs to represent different dues. His ledger attracted bees. He now works in a monastery. You prefer a system of symbols, numbers, and what you generously call abbreviations. HLFBRL stands for half barley. GZX2 is 2 geese, untaxed. BPT means bread, possibly taxable. The question marks are important. They give you room to deny things later. The ledger is meant to be presented during inspections. These are rare, but terrifying. A royal auditor might demand to see your entries, flip through pages with gloved fingers, and raise an eyebrow at entries like, possibly, symbolic ox, see oral tradition. If your ledger is unclear, you are unclear. If your ledger is too clear, you are suspicious. This is why the margins are your true allies. In them you record the subtext, the sideways glances, the barter that almost wasn't, the sudden rain that turned tax day into a mud-based retreat. One margin reads, "Chicken escaped. Too fast. No witnesses. Blame wind." Another. "Coin clipped. Told it was a family tradition." One historian claims that these ledgers are the most honest part of medieval governance, not because they are accurate, but because they are personal. The notes reveal not what was taxed, but how people responded. Turnip tithe resisted with moderate sarcasm. Baker attempted diversion via song, partial success. Rooster present, possibly involved. There is scholarly debate about whether medieval ledgers were truly used for accountability or simply as protective amulets. Some collectors carried ledgers not to explain taxes, but to prove they tried. "See," the ledger says, "I wrote it down, therefore it happened, or was supposed to." You once used the ledger to stop a thrown rock. It caught the spine and bounced off. The dent remains. So does the rock, now serving as a paperweight labeled "Tax Protest Autumn." Midday arrives. You ride out to recheck the barley tally from last week. The villagers are already arguing before you dismount. The original entry says 3.5 sacks, and one man insists you meant 3.5 handfuls. You show him the page. He squints. "Looks like an H," he says, "or a fish." You underline the original figure. He nods and walks away, satisfied that justice has at least been attempted. The rooster follows. Of course it does. It now associates the ledger with food or conflict, possibly both. Back at the manor, the steward demands an accounting of unpaid scutage. You flip to the page marked with a dried flower. This was your attempt at making that page memorable. Unfortunately, the flower smeared the ink, and now the entry reads, "Paid in floral regret, worth 2 coins." The steward sighs. You both agree to write it off as symbolic aid. Some entries have been retroactively edited. You know because you did it. 1 pig becomes 1 pig. Small, recalcitrant, maybe a dog. 4 jars of honey becomes 2 jars of honey, 1 of bees, 1 disputed. There is a line marked only "the cabbage incident." You do not remember what it means. You refuse to ask. The ledger contains more than numbers. It contains memory. That time a noble paid you in raw wool and then asked for change. That time you accidentally taxed a visiting minstrel who turned the event into a ballad titled "The Man Who Took My Socks." That ballad followed you through 3 counties. Some pages stick together. You separate them slowly. Between them is a pressed leaf, a bit of string, and a tiny drawing of a cart. You have no idea why. You leave them there. That is how a ledger works. You do not erase history. You stack it. You annotate it. You pretend it makes sense. The rooster has found a perch beside the ledger now. Occasionally it taps the margins with its beak, as if suggesting edits. You ignore it. You've done worse proofreading jobs. In the back of the book is your favorite page, miscellaneous and apologies. It lists taxes that were never truly resolved. Oats traded for song. Goose refused to be counted. Turnip declared sovereign. Man claimed cow was on spiritual journey. You submit the ledger once a season. It is carried to a clerk in the nearest administrative centre, who will read the first 3 pages, sigh, and stamp the cover with a seal that means, "We acknowledge this exists." That is the extent of oversight. At night, you wrap the ledger in cloth, tuck it beneath your cot, and try not to dream of rows and columns. Sometimes you do anyway. In those dreams, the margins argue back. One even involved a goose giving a lecture on decimal notation. You woke up shouting, "That's not what tally marks mean." Once, a rival collector borrowed your ledger just to look. They returned it with 1 note. You're either a genius or a goat with ink. You took it as a compliment. The spine is cracked, the cover frayed, the pages thickened by rain, by soot, by the oil from your fingers, and still it goes with you, from town to village, from manor to mill, from barn to oddly shaped sheds where questionable cheeses live. When you die, the ledger will be passed on. Another hand will take the quill. They will flip through your pages, scoff at your abbreviations, and add their own CPNB, cheese payment, not best. RVP, rooster visible, passive. The system endures, not because it is efficient, not because it is fair, but because someone wrote it down, and that in the end is all a tax really needs. You close the book. The rooster closes its eyes. Outside, the night settles like dust over a shelf of parchment. And in the corner of the room, the ledger waits, patient, heavy, vaguely judgmental. The trouble with medieval bribes is that no one calls them bribes. They are gifts, tokens, expressions of goodwill, unsolicited gratitude, technically frowned upon, legally grey, and almost always wrapped in cloth. You are greeted this morning by a woman holding a pie. Not just any pie, an alarmingly symmetrical one, crust, fluted with intent. She hands it to you without speaking. You take it with a nod and the practiced neutrality of a man who knows better than to ask what is inside. Later, when no one is watching, you lift the crust and find 2 coins pressed between layers of apple and plausible deniability. You do not eat the pie, you do record the coins, under found objects, possibly edible. Your ledger already has a page for this. It is labelled Offerings Misc. The church has tithes, the king has levies. You have jam jars, unsolicited ducklings, and a pocket full of strategically folded linen that somehow always contains a charm, a coin, or a message that reads, "Blessings to your horse." You do not own a horse. The message is understood. Today, you are visiting a particularly grateful village. You know this because every visit here ends with your satchel mysteriously heavier, your pockets oddly perfumed, and at least one rooster following you home. Sometimes the rooster is metaphorical, sometimes it is literal. Today, it is both. 'Tis the moment you arrive, a merchant greets you with a parcel wrapped in velvet. "Just some cloth scraps?" he says casually. You weigh it. It feels more like silver than scrap. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. "My ledger's always been tidy, hasn't it?" You nod. You will note his taxes as exact. You do not mention the parcel. The velvet disappears into your cart. Bribes are not offered with flourish. They are placed, slid, left near elbows, tucked under chairs. Once, a man dropped a purse into your boot while pretending to compliment your stitching. You did not have the heart to tell him the boots were borrowed. There is a social choreography to it. Everyone pretends it is not happening. The briber pretends to be generous. The collector pretends to be surprised. The rooster pretends not to notice. No one believes any of it. A woman brings you a bowl of stew. Warm, fragrant, suspiciously well-timed. You eat it. Inside is a small bone with a ribbon tied around it. The ribbon holds a message. Please forget the cider barrel. You underline the cider entry once, lightly. It is not forgotten, but it is forgiven. One fringe belief among local peasants is that if a collector receives more than 3 bribes in a day, their sense of justice resets. You have never tested this theory, but it explains why several people try to offer you things early in the morning. A child once handed you a flower and said, "For fairness." You accepted it. You were still overcharged on eggs. A scholar once argued that bribes were simply taxes in reverse, payments from the taxed to the collector, rather than the other way around. This scholar was promptly excluded from future tax symposiums. His work now sits in a drawer somewhere labelled controversial. At midday, you receive a woolen scarf that smells faintly of rosemary and influence. It is very warm. You thank the donor, a shepherd, with 3 unpaid lamb fees. You make a small note. Repayment in progress. Excellent weaving. 1 lamb bleats as if objecting. You ignore it. Bribes often arrive in edible form. Bread with suspiciously shiny crusts. Ale gifted in quantities too generous for courtesy. Once, an entire ham wrapped in linen with a note pinned to the side that read, "The rent is spiritually complete." You had no idea what that meant. You accepted it anyway. You now keep a section of your ledger labeled metaphysical settlements. There is, of course, a line. Some collectors cross it. They extort. They threaten. They turn the hint of a bribe into an expectation. You do not. Not because of morals, but because it is simply more work. Polite bribery flows. Forced bribery backfires. You once heard of a collector who demanded bribes openly. He wore a pouch labeled appreciations. It was stolen. Twice. He now works in the archives. The rooster, ever watchful, joins you near the tavern. It hops onto a barrel and stares. A man emerges with a clay jug and hands it to you wordlessly. You nod. He vanishes. The rooster cocks its head. You write "local wine, anonymous" in your notes. You do not taste it. You will trade it to the steward later for a better quill. One man offers you a charm against bad dreams. You thank him. Later that evening, you sleep terribly. The charm now dangles from your satchel as a warning to others. By afternoon, your cart contains 2 wheels of cheese, one very smug, a bolt of linen, definitely bribe weight, a pouch of unmarked silver tucked beneath your cloak, a decorative spoon, questionable, and a note that simply reads, "For last year's mistake. We won't tell." You have no memory of last year's mistake. You decide not to ask. You once tried to decline a bribe. A widow offered you her late husband's boots polished and wrapped. You explained gently that it was unnecessary. She cried. You took the boots. They leaked. The rooster stepped in one and refused to leave. You now carry a replacement pair. Some bribes are less traditional. A boy gives you a small carved figure of a chicken. "It's lucky," he says. You look at the rooster beside you. It narrows its eyes. You accept the carving. Later, the real rooster knocks it off a shelf. There is a ledger entry for unclassified gratuities. It includes odd things: a song, a wink, an unsolicited foot massage, you declined, a bouquet of cabbage, and one terrifying mask made of bark and ambition. You stored that one in a drawer. The drawer now sticks. There is scholarly disagreement on whether these types of gifts affected tax collection outcomes. Most historians agree they did. They just avoid writing it that way. One daring manuscript suggests that entire villages were ranked not by wealth, but by creativity of bribe. You believe it. You once received a pie shaped like a castle. Even the church bribes, quietly, a basket of figs, a candle shaped like St. Benedict, a velvet pouch of blessed herbs, which turned out to be suspiciously relaxing. You recorded it as devotional botanicals. You no longer remember the sermon that day. At sunset, you receive a letter. Folded 4 times, sealed with wax, and slipped under your ledger. It reads, "If you're happy with the paltry count, there's more where that came from." There is no signature. You raise your eyes. The innkeeper across the lane raises a mug. You do not nod, but you write "paltry, generous" in the margin. The rooster crows once, quietly, like a cough. It has watched you all day. It does not bribe. It does not need to. By evening, you sit by the hearth surrounded by offerings. You unwrap the velvet cloth. Silver glints. You do not count it. You know how much is there by the weight. You wrap it again and place it beneath your ledger. There is no glory in bribes, no celebration, no elaborate wink, just the unspoken agreement that life is smoother when a coin travels sideways now and then. And if a goose arrives at your door in a bow, you do not ask questions. You simply write, "Gratitude, feathered." The rooster settles on your windowsill. The moonlight outlines its shape. You sip from a gifted mug. You eat none of the pie. The spoon glints in the firelight. The cheese judges you. And the ledger, quietly, carefully, closes itself. You never look forward to church inspections. No one does, not even the priests, especially not the priests, and certainly not the rooster, who today has chosen to perch atop the parish gate and observe the proceedings from a safe, elevated position, like a feathery magistrate withholding his vote. The inspector's arrival is heralded by two things: the clatter of an unnecessarily polished cart and the sudden rearrangement of everyone's moral priorities. Coins are hidden, ledgers are revised. Someone discreetly adjusts a statue of St. Jerome so he appears less accusatory. You, tax collector by misfortune and familiarity, are summoned to attend the inspection, not because you are ecclesiastical, but because your ledgers include church tithes, and therefore your potential culpability is spiritual in nature. The inspector's name is Brother Willem, though no one uses it. He is simply the brother, tall, thin, and draped in robes made from wool so coarse they may have been woven from unresolved guilt. His expression suggests he has already been disappointed by this village in his dreams. His hat is unnecessarily structured. He enters the chapel like it is his courtroom, which, unfortunately, it is. You greet him with a nod. He nods back, then frowns as if that was too familiar. You apologize with your eyes. He does not accept. Church audits involve three things: incense, silence, and sudden questions. The incense is already lit, curling into the air like judgment in gas form. The silence is oppressive. The questions begin almost immediately. "Where is the barley record?" Brother Willem asks. You hand him the ledger, open to the appropriate page. He scans. He squints. He sniffs. "This entry, 2.5 bushels reluctantly given, what does that mean?" "It means they gave it," you reply, reluctantly. He stares. You adjust your collar. The rooster scratches itself. A fringe belief common in certain dioceses holds that a church inspector can see sins if the room is quiet enough. This may explain Brother Willem's deep aversion to conversation and his tendency to pause mid-sentence, as if waiting for guilt to materialize in a puff of smoke. He examines the tithe shelf. Jars, bundles, sacks, each labeled with the careful neutrality of someone unsure what might be questioned next. He points at a wheel of cheese. "Is this consecrated?" You pause. You look at the priest. The priest blinks slowly. "It's aware of the Lord," you say, carefully. Brother Willem hums in disapproval. The cheese remains silent. He finds a jar labeled honey, probable. He opens it. He dips a finger. He tastes. He nods. You exhale. The priest tries to distract him with ceremonial documents. This backfires. He begins inspecting the ink quality. He licks a page. No one breathes for 6 seconds. He nods again. The rooster hops to a lower post and stares directly into Brother Willem's soul, or tries to. The inspector does not blink. It's a contest. You look away. He moves to the tithe tallies. Here is where things get dangerous. The notched sticks must match. The church is half and the village's half. You bring them out like sacred relics. He picks up one and holds it to the light. This notch is uneven. You lean in. It is indeed uneven. It has always been uneven. It was uneven when it was made. That's because it was cut by the cooper's apprentice, you say. With enthusiasm, but without precision. Brother Willem turns to the priest. Do you confirm this? The priest looks at you, then at the stick, then back at the brother. He was very enthusiastic, the priest says. The stick is accepted. You once heard of a parish that failed an inspection because their candle wax smelled too cheerful. They were fined 3 sheep and 2 weeks of public kneeling. You suspect Brother Willem was involved. He now examines the scroll of last season's donations. His lips move as he reads. His brows move more. 1 piglet with theological markings. Explain. You glance at the priest. It had a cross-shaped patch on its back, he says, and its behavior was pious, you add. Brother Willem sighs. He writes something in his book. You suspect it says, possibly heretical livestock. There is a scholarly debate, still unresolved, on whether church inspections served any practical purpose beyond theatrical reinforcement of authority. Some argue they were necessary to prevent corruption. Others believe they simply redistributed fear. A minority opinion claims they were performance art. That scholar now makes pottery. Brother Willem lifts a sack of beans. These were due in March. They were planted in March, you explain, harvested in May. He says nothing. He replaces the sack. He pauses beside the baptismal font. He dips a finger in. He sniffs. He makes a note. The priest begins a prayer, loudly. The rooster walks in, finds a sunlit patch near the altar, and sits. Brother Willem eyes it. The rooster blinks. It does not leave. Mid-inspection, a boy arrives with a parcel for you, an unsolicited offering from a nearby village. Inside, 1 pewter spoon and a note reading, "For your honesty." Brother Willem reads it. He raises 1 eyebrow. You record it immediately under incoming bribe, not accepted, received anyway. You return to the tithe list. He checks each household's entry against your ledger. Most align, some nearly align. A few do not align in the traditional sense. For example, 1 line in your ledger reads, Miller, 1 barrel grain, 1 excuse, 1 frog, accidental. Brother Willem asks about the frog. It was in the barrel, you say. And it counted as payment? It was present during the transaction. He writes something. The priest coughs. The rooster adjusts its feathers. You hand him a jar of preserved pears marked deferred contribution. He opens it. He eats one. He looks satisfied. You make a mental note. Next time, preserve pears. An hour passes. Another. Brother Willem has now reviewed every jar, bag, scroll, and sack in the chapel. He requests a full recount of this year's egg offerings. You hesitate. The egg ledger is flexible. He holds out his hand. You give him the scroll. He reads. He stops. Eggs 22.5 dozen, includes cracked and decorative. Yes, you say. Some were festive. Define festive. 1 was painted. He considers this. Then, with the soft resignation of someone who's been to 10 parishes in 6 days, he sighs and accepts it. The rooster nods. The final test is the incense count. Every church must retain a record of used and remaining incense. Brother Willem counts each stick. The priest pretends not to sweat. The numbers match exactly. No one cheers. But someone breathes again. He signs the inspection scroll. His signature is illegible but definite. He places his seal. The inspection is complete. He turns to you. Your records are messy. They are accurate. Messy and accurate, he says. A rare combination. He leaves without further ceremony. The cart rattles away. The silence lifts like fog. The priest collapses into a pew. The rooster wanders into the vestry. You open your ledger and make a new entry. Church inspection complete. Losses, none. Judgment, partial. Rooster, victorious, you pack up the preserved pears, you tuck away the scrolls, you retrieve your rejected spoon. You nod to the statue of St. Jerome, who appears less annoyed now. The chapel settles, the incense burns down, the rooster sleeps beneath the altar, and you, for once, write in the margin of the ledger not a complaint, not a note, but a single, unheard-of word. Past. Coins are supposed to be simple. They are metal, they clink, they sit in your pouch and declare, this has value, even if they occasionally smell like cabbage and betrayal. But in practice, medieval coins were as trustworthy as a merchant with two last names and an alibi. And so begins your daily dance with deception, a waltz of clipped silver, false weights, and the occasional enthusiastic counterfeit that tries far too hard. This morning begins with the smith handing you a coin that looks just a little too thin. You weigh it in your hand, you bite it, as tradition requires. It leaves a strange taste, not metallic, more disappointing. That's full weight, the smith says. You hold it up to the light. It catches the sun in a way that only half legitimate currency can. He leans forward, lowers his voice. It's honest silver, just slightly less enthusiastic. You nod politely, you write coin, underweight, confident in your ledger. He will not be the last today. Coin clipping is the art of shaving tiny slivers from the edges of coins. Do it once, and you are a petty criminal. Do it 1,000 times, and you are a banker. The result is a coin that technically still exists, but in spirit has already retired. Every tax collector knows the signs. A clipped coin spins oddly. The monarch's nose is slightly off-center. The edge is smoother than a bishop's wine goblet. And the weight, it lacks conviction. Which brings us to your second enemy of the day, the merchant with the scale. Scales are supposed to be impartial, balanced, saintly even. But this merchant's scale has clearly attended the school of creative accounting. One pan is just a little stickier, the other suspiciously shallow. You place a coin on one side. He places a standard weight on the other. It tilts. He frowns theatrically. Must be bad silver, he mutters. You examine the weight. It's hollow. You examine the coin. It's honest. You examine your patience. It's running low. Still you nod and accept the trick. You mark his taxes as paid with enthusiasm and additional scrutiny. A fringe belief in this region suggests that if you clip a coin exactly 12 times, the devil will owe you a favor. This belief is not supported by scripture, economics, or physics. Nevertheless, you once found a coin clipped into the shape of a star. The peasant who gave it to you winked. You accepted it out of curiosity. The rooster tried to eat it. No one was rewarded. Midday brings a miller with a pouch of coins. Heavy pouch. Light coins. One appears to be made of lead, another tin. One feels like soapstone. You hold it up. This one smells like candle wax, you say. He shrugs. Times are hard. You do not argue. You simply write, Miller, mixed coinage, optimistic. There is a scholarly debate about how much fake currency was actually in circulation during the late medieval period. Some say it was rampant. Others claim it was a minor nuisance. A few theorists, clearly traumatized, insist that the entire economy was mostly theater, and coin only mattered if someone believed it did. You consider this as a villager hands you a wooden coin painted silver. For taxes? You ask. He grins. It's metaphorical. You write, payment declined, conceptual. The rooster watches from a nearby barrel. You suspect it is starting to grasp fiscal policy. Weights, too, are a battlefield. Every merchant has their own set. Some are honest, some are ambitious. One man presents you with a stone certified by the prior. The stone is hollow, the prior is blind. You accept this as ecclesiastical humor. You carry your own standard weight, of course, kept in a pouch, wrapped in cloth, blessed only by familiarity. When questioned, you present it with a sigh, and the authority of someone who knows it will be ignored. It is heavier than most would like. This is not accidental. A man hands you a handful of coins that all bear the face of a monarch who has been dead for 80 years. You stare. He shrugs. "Still legal," he says. "Still suspicious," you reply. He offers a turnip to make up the difference. You accept it, but only because the rooster approves. There is a long-standing scam involving slitting open coin pouches and removing just a few coins, leaving the rest untouched. Done carefully, the owner never notices. Done poorly, the pouch spills and someone starts screaming. You've seen both. Today, you receive a pouch that rattles with promise. You open it. Inside, 6 stones, 3 buttons, and a dried bean. You show it to the farmer. He blinks. "Must have been the children," he says, forgetting there are no children in this village. You nod. "Must have been the wind." You mark his tax as pending possible weather interference. One man offers you foreign coin. It's large, gold, and completely unusable in any context outside of maritime trade. You accept it because it's pretty. You have no idea how to value it. You write, "Payment received, decorative, possible bribe." You once received a coin so small you could barely see the face. You were told it was minted during a silver shortage. You later found out it was a washer. You still carry it as a reminder that belief can be alloyed with error. Toward late afternoon, a nobleman sends a messenger with a sack of silver. Perfect weight, gleaming finish, too perfect. You test one. It bends. You look at the messenger. He shrugs. "We buy them that way, easier to stack." You write, "Payment, squishy, source, noble." This goes in a special section of the ledger labeled, "Yes, but." The rooster returns and hops into your cart. It nests on the pouch of fake coins and refuses to leave. You take this as symbolic oversight. Once, long ago, you attempted to refuse all clipped or fake currency. You declared a week of fiscal integrity. By day 3, your pouch was empty, your patience thin, and you'd been offered 3 goats and a sock in protest. The goats were loud, the sock was not clean. You now maintain a more practical stance, accept everything, document carefully, and let the steward sort it out. Evening falls. You light a candle. The rooster falls asleep beside your accounting tools. Your pouch contains a full spectrum of monetary attempts. Clipped silver, painted wood, wax coins, one that might be soap, 2 that smell like mushrooms, and a small rock with a crown scratched into it. You pour them onto the table and begin sorting. You test weights, you record entries. You create a new category, coin-like. You add a final note. Coins received today varied in size, material, and commitment. Most attempted to be real, some succeeded. None were boring. You close the ledger, you place the most honest coin in a drawer. You place the most dishonest coin under your pillow for dreams. The rooster snores, the fake coins shimmer, and outside the night carries the soft rustle of deception on the wind. Winter taxes begin with frost on your ledger and end with you wondering whether you are being paid in frozen turnips or metaphors. No one likes collecting in winter. No one likes paying in winter. And no one likes standing ankle-deep in what appears to be snow but smells faintly of compost and regret. The problem is timing. Tax season never waits for a thaw. It arrives when carts stick, roads vanish, and every villager you need to speak to is conveniently boiling something important indoors and can't come to the door. Today begins with sleet, mud, and a goat that does not believe in boundaries. The goat is not yours. It has never been yours. But it keeps showing up whenever you leave the cart unattended. The rooster eyes it disapprovingly From a perch on the nearest frozen fence post, it refuses to step in the mud, you understand. Your boots make a sound like squelch, followed by why as you trudge toward the Reeves house. The door opens slowly. The Reeve is wearing all his clothing at once. He greets you with the enthusiasm of a man who just discovered his roof leaks directly over his bed. "Bit early for taxes, isn't it?" he says. "It's midwinter," you reply. "Exactly. The first house on your list claims to have paid already." You consult your ledger. There is an entry from summer. "Payment promised when apples ripen." You ask if the apples ever did. The house goes quiet. Then the shutters close. You write, "Pending apple-related silence. Each household owes something different. Some owe grain, now frozen into edible bricks. Others owe firewood, damp and gently molding. One owes wool, but hands you a bundle that smells like it still contains the sheep. You make a note. Textile, aggressive. Seasonal taxes were never designed with climate in mind. Whoever wrote the tax schedule apparently believed that peasants hibernate and emerge in spring with sacks of silver. In reality, they emerge in February with chilblains, half a cabbage, and an excuse. Today's most popular excuse: it's too cold to count. Second most popular: the mule fell in a ditch. Third: we thought you weren't coming this year. You always come. The ledger demands it. A man tries to pay you with a meat pie. It is mostly pastry. Inside is something grey, fibrous, and defensive. You accept it. You record it as food item, seasonal, uncooperative. You pass a pile of firewood arranged in the shape of a person. Someone's attempt to pretend they are home via sculpture. You tap it with your quill. It collapses. You leave a note on the stump. The rooster follows, hopping from stone to fence, avoiding the sludge. You are envious. Your feet have not been dry since last Tuesday. A woman hands you a jar of pickled eggs as payment. You ask if that is truly her tax obligation. She says yes, then pauses. Probably. You record it under provisional protein. A fringe belief in the colder regions suggests that taxes paid during a snowstorm do not count. You've had people step outside, see a single flake fall, and retreat indoors yelling "Sanctuary!" You once had to collect grain in a blizzard, while a man yelled weather-related proverbs at you from a window. A scholar once proposed that all winter taxes be symbolic, offerings of intention and gratitude. That scholar was immediately ignored by every steward with bills to pay and pigs to feed. You are expected to collect the full amount, even if it arrives frozen, miscounted, or steaming ominously. You receive 1 bushel of rye, solid as stone. You knock on it, and it echoes. The villager insists it's just chilled. You record it as structural grain, possibly haunted. Someone hands you a chicken. It is not alive. It is not fresh. You are not sure it is chicken. You take it. You do not sniff it. The roads are slick with mud, ice, and indecision. Your cartwheels creak with each turn. The goats pull harder than usual. Yes, you are now using goats. The mule left for better working conditions. The rooster continues on foot. You reach the outer cottages, places so remote that people only receive taxes when someone remembers they exist. These are the folk who pay in oddities: a bundle of dried herbs labeled smoke repellent, a carved spoon with 1 prong, a sketch of Saint Sebastian drawn in coal. You take them all. You write miscellaneous tributes, regional flair. By mid-afternoon your cloak is soaked, your quill is softening, and your fingers are so cold they can no longer form opinions. You warm them on a chimney pipe, then knock on the door of a man known for paying only in late February, and only in riddles. Today he hands you a bag of flour and says, "From the snow's first sigh." You nod. You write, "Flower poetic." There is a debate among collectors about what to do with poetic payments. Some say refuse them. Others say translate them into livestock equivalents. You once accepted a haiku in place of butter. You regretted it. It had no dairy content. A woman offers you a fur cloak. You thank her until she clarifies it is not hers. It belonged to my cousin. He disappeared. Might be tax related. You decline the cloak. You make a note. Fur, mysterious, possibly cursed. The wind picks up. The rooster takes shelter in your cart next to the sack of ambiguous grain and 2 jars of winter jelly. You suspect the jelly is mostly lard. You do not open it. You once tried to implement a winter surcharge to compensate for frostbite, emotional damage, and soaked ledgers. You were told, very politely, that you'd receive a surcharge yourself. You dropped the idea. A man pays you in icicles. They were beautiful this morning, he says. You point out they've melted. He shrugs. Taxes are temporary. You record water, formerly majestic. Your cart now holds 1 half-frozen cabbage, 3 jars of pickled root, unspecified, a sack of something labelled wheat-ish, and a goat wearing a bell you did not authorize. The bell sounds like sarcasm. You ask the baker for his seasonal tithe. He hands you a loaf so dense it rings when tapped. You ask what's in it. He replies, hope. You take it. You take what you can. The sun begins to vanish behind a fog of snow and chimney smoke. You are done. For today. You trudge back to your shelter, a loft above the stable, with 1 window, a straw bed, and a fire that always smells faintly of potatoes. You remove your boots with a sound that makes the rooster flinch. You sit, you open the ledger, you attempt to write. The ink is frozen, you warm it under your arm. The rooster hops onto your desk, pecks once, then curls up beside your inkwell. You tally the day's harvest, 3 unverified vegetables, 1 poem, 2 metaphorical objects, half a chicken, and a flour sack that may contain snow. You write, winter taxes received with resistance and icicles may require interpretation, goat involved, rooster unsupervised. You close the ledger, you hang your cloak to dry, the wind rattles the shutters, the rooster snores. And outside, the season taxes everyone equally, no quill required. Taxing peasants is an exercise in patience. Taxing clergy is an exercise in ritual. Taxing knights? That is an exercise in not dying. You begin the day with a message. Reminder, Sir Aldrich's land levy is due. Proceed with care. The note is signed by someone whose handwriting has clearly trembled. Likely a steward, possibly a ghost. Sir Aldrich is a knight of middling reputation and impressive height. His lands include 2 fields, a manor with 1 functioning chimney, and a moat that sometimes contains water, but more often contains goats. He once declared that all his debts had been paid in full on the battlefield of personal honor. This was not legally binding. The rooster is with you today, standing in your cart as you approach the knight's estate. It is silent, judging, likely recalling the last time you visited a knight and left with fewer coins and slightly more trauma. The gate is open. Not welcoming, just stuck. You nudge it with your quill case. It creaks like a warning. A squire greets you, wearing boots 2 sizes too large, and an expression of generalized panic. You give your name and purpose. He flees inside. Sir Aldrich does not come to the door. He sends his boots instead, carried by a servant. You wait. Eventually he appears. 7 feet of chainmail, beard, and disdain. His sword is not drawn, but it is visible, which is its own form of diplomacy. Tax? He asks. You nod. He grunts. For what? Land, you reply. He looks at the land. Still here. You nod again. That's why it's taxable. He glares. You begin to recite the official declaration of levy. He interrupts by throwing a turnip at a goose. The goose is not involved. You continue anyway. Knights are not technically exempt from taxes, but they often believe they are. Some quote chivalric codes. Others refer vaguely to ancient oaths. One knight once claimed exemption due to a dream involving St. George and a suspiciously large ledger. He still paid, eventually. Sir Aldrich leads you into his hall. It smells like damp banners and boiled meat. He offers a seat. You decline. It's covered in armor pieces. The rooster hops onto a stool and settles in. "I have no coin," he says, proudly. "Goods are acceptable." He gestures to a pile of shields. You glance at them. One is cracked, one is cursed, one is technically a door. You select a small, usable one and write, "Received, partial shield, decorative, possibly sincere." He disappears into another room. You hear muttering. Something metallic crashes. He returns with a goblet. "Silver," he says. You examine it. It is silver-colored, possibly tin, definitely engraved with a scene of heroic fishing. You accept it. You write, "Goblet, knightly, value, symbolic." Knights often pay with items that once had glory but now have mildew. You once received a horn that only played one note, regret. Another time, a helmet filled with bees. That wasn't even symbolic. That was just alarming. Sir Aldrich presents a tapestry. "Hung this at a tourney," he says. It depicts a horse. Just a horse. No knight, no battle, just a horse, looking contemplative. "Taxes," he explains. You record, tapestry, equine, message unclear. There's a fringe belief in noble circles that if a knight donates a war item, it absolves financial debt. This explains the growing pile of broken spears and slightly dented helmets in your storage barn. It does not explain the loot someone once handed you, claiming it had seen combat. Sir Aldrich now tries to pay with a poem. You raise an eyebrow. He recites it. It's about loyalty, steel, and possibly cheese. You write, "Poem offered, declined, strong dairy themes." He frowns. "You're hard to impress." You nod. "I'm underpaid." He throws you a pouch. It clinks. You open it. Inside, 7 coins. 1 is whole, 2 are clipped, the rest are buttons. You thank him anyway. "You're braver than most," he says. "I'm just colder," you reply. He laughs. The rooster crows once, possibly a snort. Knights are less likely to argue than peasants, but they are more likely to gesture with weapons while doing it. You once had a disagreement over a land boundary that ended with a thrown javelin and an apology letter that smelled like ale. Sir Aldrich escorts you to the stables. "Take a pig," he says. You look. There is one pig. It is asleep. It has a helmet. You point. He nods. "Battle pig." You take it. The rooster disapproves. You write, "Received, armored pig. Disposition, neutral." The final item he offers is a banner, torn, faded, and featuring a crest that has not been recognized since the Plough Rebellion. "History," he says. You record it. Banner, obsolete, likely dusty. You prepare to leave. Sir Aldrich stops you. "One more thing," he says. He hands you a book. It's titled "The Noble Art of Not Paying Taxes." You flip through it. Every page is blank. You look up. He winks. You write. Book empty. Honesty absolute. The rooster hops back into the cart. The pig follows. You do not stop it. You're not convinced you could. Back at your quarters, you unpack the day's yield. A dented goblet, a horse tapestry, one mostly accurate coin, a blank book, and a pig in chainmail. The pig settles beside the fire. The rooster eyes it cautiously. You update your ledger. Night payment accepted, value symbolic, partial, amusing, threat level low. Pig named Percival. There's a scholarly debate on whether knights ever paid fair taxes. Some records say yes. Others say they paid in glory, which is not currently recognized as legal tender. You place the goblet on a shelf. It lists slightly to the left. You do not correct it. You close the ledger. The pig snores. The rooster glares. You light a candle and whisper the day's summary. Collected from a man with a sword, a poem, and no fiscal awareness. Survived. You sleep with one eye open. Just in case Sir Aldrich reconsiders. There is no official entry for rumour tax in any royal decree. And yet if you stay long enough in any medieval village, you will inevitably find yourself taxed by gossip. Reputation has weight here. Whispered scandal costs more than grain. And for a tax collector, already the natural focal point of suspicion, frustration, and poorly timed livestock accidents, the rumours arrive before you do. This morning, a man greets you at the edge of the village and offers you a cabbage. To keep the birds away, he says. You thank him, even though you know perfectly well it is not for birds. It is protection. Against you. Or more precisely, against the things people say about you. The rooster walks behind you, unimpressed by cabbage-based magic. As you make your way into the settlement, a few villagers nod politely, a few look away. One woman clutches a wooden spoon and mutters something into her apron. You hear the word spoon again later, this time from a child pointing at your ledger with the glee of someone who has just spotted a dragon's egg. You ask the baker, finally, what is going on. He sighs and says, "They think you carry the golden spoon." You pause. "I what?" He nods solemnly. "The spoon that brings misfortune, taxes, droughts, loud chickens, bad cheese, that sort of thing." You blink. "I'm holding a quill." He shrugs. Quills look like spoons to people who are suspicious and tired. You write down, "Village has entered spoon phase. Avoid cutlery references." The golden spoon legend, it turns out, is a local belief, possibly invented last month, possibly older than the wind, no one is sure. The story varies depending on whom you ask. In one version, the spoon was forged by a cursed bishop who accidentally tithed too much. In another, it was left behind by a noblewoman who taxed her own servants for smiling. Either way, it has become your new nickname. You are now, officially, the Spoon Man. Someone even carved a small spoon from ash wood and tied it to your cart, for protection, for warning, for decoration. Unclear. The rooster pecks it off. You begin collecting tax in the usual way, with awkward conversation, long pauses, and a ledger slightly damp from being stored too close to a suspicious sack of turnips. But the villagers are wary. They give you offerings with side glances. One woman insists her basket of eggs be blessed before you take it. You are not licensed to bless anything, so you cough and say, "By the accounting powers vested in me, so be it." It seems to work. There is a fringe belief in some regions that certain tax collectors are cursed, not by birth, but by function, that the act of collecting inherently attracts supernatural imbalance. You once had a farmer refuse to hand over wheat because he dreamed you would turn into a weasel. You did not, but the dream was oddly specific. Today's offerings include the usual mix of barley, wool, and spiritual discomfort. But added to the pile are strange tokens, a pouch of dried lavender, to ease your wrath, a small rock with a face drawn on it, so you will not get lonely, and a single coin wrapped in sheep's wool. You ask why. The woman whispers, "To keep the tax from knowing it's money." You accept it. You write, "Stealth tax disguised as spiritual fluff." At midday, the carpenter approaches with a serious expression. "They say you cursed the village of Penmere," he tells you. You did not. "They say you took a golden spoon from them and everything went wrong. The bread collapsed. The cow gave up. The wind blew inward." You nod slowly. What actually happened was a grain mold outbreak and a particularly pessimistic cow. Still, he adds, you were there. You write, spoon theory spreading, cow unrelated. You remember Penmere. It rained inside their alehouse. That had nothing to do with you, you're fairly sure. The priest invites you to lunch and spends the entire meal casually asking whether you've ever encountered demonic cutlery. You do your best to explain that your tools are quills and tallies, not utensils of doom. He says nothing, just slides the salt slightly closer to you as if to keep you in his sacred circle. By the afternoon, someone has scratched a spoon symbol into the side of your cart. The rooster crows at it. You scrub it off with a piece of bread. The bread now smells like varnish and fear. You eat it anyway. You regret it immediately. A child runs past and shouts, "He brings the spoon!" You shout back, "I bring the records." They do not care. You pause at a cottage where the roof has half fallen in. You ask about the tithe. The man sighs and says, "It collapsed after you arrived last time. We weren't going to mention it, but now..." You glance at the roof, then at your own feet, then at the sky. "I wasn't involved," he shrugs. "Hard to prove." You accept a sack of flour and note, "Structural damage coincidental. Flour gifted under protest." One scholar wrote that belief in tax omens rose sharply during the later medieval period. It had nothing to do with actual curses and everything to do with psychology, anxiety, and weather. But try explaining that to a woman who insists her potatoes turned bitter after you visited. Evening approaches. You receive a small parcel, wrapped in cloth, from someone who refuses to meet your eye. Inside, a carved spoon. It glows faintly, or maybe that's just firelight. You place it gently in your satchel, beside your ink pot. The rooster climbs into your cart and sits on your ledger. It refuses to move. You take this as spiritual shielding. You walk through the village one last time before sunset. A few brave souls nod at you. One says, "Thank you for being fair." Another mutters, "May the spoon spare us." You say nothing. You return to your quarters and record the day's totals. 3 jars of pickled things. 2 sacks of probably legitimate grain. 1 goat that will not stop looking at your hands. And 5 carved spoons. You create a new page in the ledger. Local rumors and involuntary titles. Spoon man, confirmed. Curses, unverified. Bread failures, probably not related. Reputation, actively mythologized. Rooster, unimpressed. You sit by the fire, you hold the carved spoon in your hand. It is smooth, surprisingly well made. You place it on the table. The fire crackles, the rooster sighs. Outside, a dog howls. Somewhere in the night, someone is probably telling a story about the man who taxes villages with a golden spoon, whose presence makes cheese curdle and shingles slip. And someone is nodding, wide-eyed, spoon in hand, passing the tale along like it was gospel. And you, sitting beside a ledger that smells faintly of dried lavender and unresolved suspicion, simply wait for dawn. There is no official entry for rumor tax in any royal decree. And yet, if you stay long enough in any medieval village, you will inevitably find yourself taxed by gossip. Reputation has weight here. Whispered scandal costs more than grain. And for a tax collector, already the natural focal point of suspicion, frustration, and poorly timed livestock accidents, the rumors arrive before you do. This morning, a man greets you at the edge of the village and offers you a cabbage. "To keep the birds away," he says. You thank him, even though you know perfectly well it is not for birds. It is protection. Against you. Or more precisely, against the things people say about you. The rooster walks behind you, unimpressed by cabbage-based magic. As you make your way into the settlement, a few villagers nod politely, a few look away. One woman clutches a wooden spoon and mutters something into her apron. You hear the word "spoon" again later, this time from a child pointing at your ledger with the glee of someone who has just spotted a dragon's egg. You ask the baker, finally, what is going on. He sighs and says, "They think you carry the golden spoon." You pause. "I what?" He nods solemnly. "The spoon that brings misfortune, taxes, droughts, loud chickens, bad cheese, that sort of thing." You blink. "I'm holding a quill." He shrugs. Quills look like spoons to people who are suspicious and tired. You write down, "Village has entered spoon phase. Avoid cutlery references." The golden spoon legend, it turns out, is a local belief, possibly invented last month, possibly older than the wind. No one is sure. The story varies depending on whom you ask. In one version, the spoon was forged by a cursed bishop who accidentally tithed too much. In another, it was left behind by a noblewoman who taxed her own servants for smiling. Either way, it has become your new nickname. You are now, officially, the Spoon Man. Someone even carved a small spoon from ash wood and tied it to your cart, for protection, for warning, for decoration. Unclear. The rooster pecks it off. You begin collecting tax in the usual way, with awkward conversation, long pauses, and a ledger slightly damp from being stored too close to a suspicious sack of turnips. But the villagers are wary. They give you offerings with side glances. One woman insists her basket of eggs be blessed before you take it. You are not licensed to bless anything, so you cough and say, "By the accounting powers vested in me, so be it." It seems to work. There is a fringe belief in some regions that certain tax collectors are cursed, not by birth, but by function. That the act of collecting inherently attracts supernatural imbalance. You once had a farmer refuse to hand over wheat because he dreamed you would turn into a weasel. You did not. But the dream was oddly specific. Today's offerings include the usual mix of barley, wool, and spiritual discomfort. But added to the pile are strange tokens: a pouch of dried lavender, to ease your wrath, a small rock with a face drawn on it, so you will not get lonely, and a single coin wrapped in sheep's wool. You ask why. The woman whispers, "To keep the tax from knowing it's money." You accept it. You write, "Stealth tax disguised as spiritual fluff." At midday, the carpenter approaches with a serious expression. "They say you cursed the village of Penmere," he tells you. You did not. "They say you took a golden spoon from them and everything went wrong. The bread collapsed. The cow gave up. The wind blew inward." You nod slowly. What actually happened was a grain mold outbreak and a particularly pessimistic cow. "Still," he adds, "you were there." You write, "Spoon theory spreading, cow unrelated." You remember Penmere. It rained inside their alehouse. That had nothing to do with you. You're fairly sure. The priest invites you to lunch and spends the entire meal casually asking whether you've ever encountered demonic cutlery. You do your best to explain that your tools are quills and tallies, not utensils of doom. He says nothing, just slides the salt slightly closer to you as if to keep you in a sacred circle. By the afternoon, someone has scratched a spoon symbol into the side of your cart. The rooster crows at it. You scrub it off with a piece of bread. The bread now smells like varnish and fear. You eat it anyway. You regret it immediately. A child runs past and shouts, "He brings the spoon!" You shout back, "I bring the records." They do not care. You pause at a cottage where the roof has half fallen in. You ask about the tithe. The man sighs and says, "It collapsed after you arrived last time. We weren't going to mention it, but now." You glance at the roof, then at your own feet, then at the sky. "I wasn't involved." He shrugs. "Hard to prove." You accept a sack of flour and note, "Structural damage coincidental." Flour gifted under protest. One scholar wrote that belief in tax omens rose sharply during the later medieval period. It had nothing to do with actual curses and everything to do with psychology, anxiety, and weather. But try explaining that to a woman who insists her potatoes turned bitter after you visited. Evening approaches, you receive a small parcel, wrapped in cloth, from someone who refuses to meet your eye. Inside, a carved spoon. It glows faintly, or maybe that's just firelight. You place it gently in your satchel, beside your ink pot. The rooster climbs into your cart and sits on your ledger. It refuses to move. You take this as spiritual shielding. You walk through the village one last time before sunset. A few brave souls nod at you. One says, "Thank you for being fair." Another mutters, "May the spoon spare us." You say nothing. You return to your quarters and record the day's totals. 3 jars of pickled things. 2 sacks of probably legitimate grain. 1 goat that will not stop looking at your hands. And 5 carved spoons. You create a new page in the ledger. Local rumors and involuntary titles. Spoon Man, confirmed. Curses, unverified. Bread failures, probably not related. Reputation, actively mythologized. Rooster, unimpressed. You sit by the fire, you hold the carved spoon in your hand. It is smooth, surprisingly well made. You place it on the table. The fire crackles, the rooster sighs. Outside, a dog howls. Somewhere in the night, someone is probably telling a story about the man who taxes villages with a golden spoon, whose presence makes cheese curdle and shingles slip. And someone is nodding, wide-eyed, spoon in hand, passing the tale along like it was gospel. And you, sitting beside a ledger that smells faintly of dried lavender and unresolved suspicion, simply wait for dawn. Some retire with medals, some with property, some with a pension and a second home near a clean lake. But a medieval tax collector retires with an overstuffed satchel, a pair of squelching boots, a drawer full of inkless quills, and the nagging feeling that 3 entire villages still owe you something, possibly money, possibly explanation, possibly revenge. It begins naturally with a letter. The sort that feels like it was written by someone who has never left a room, never met a goat, and never bled for a barley discrepancy. The ink is neat. The language is indifferent. Your services are no longer required, it says. No seal from the crown, no embossed ribbon. Just a flat tone of bureaucratic closure. Below it, smaller. Please return any remaining materials to the Office of Civic Affairs. And beneath that, scratched in almost as an afterthought, including any animals acquired during field work. You glance toward the hearth. The rooster is asleep in the firewood basket. It has been with you longer than your second cloak. You decide, silently, that the rooster is not a material. It is a witness, possibly a minor spirit. Certainly not state property. You read the letter again. The rooster snores faintly as if confirming your decision. There is no retirement ceremony, no procession, no awkward ale-soaked speech. There is a final assignment, drop off your ledgers, tools, and relevant notations to the regional clerical outpost, and then you are, in theory, free. You are also, in reality, unemployed, exhausted, and entirely unconvinced you know how to do anything that does not involve bartering over cheese weight. Your final ledger is thick. The spine is cracked. One page still smells faintly of fish tax. You wrap it in cloth. You place it in the cart next to a rutabaga that was given to you 2 days ago by a woman who insisted it represented closure. You have no idea what that means, but the rutabaga has sprouted. It seems eager to participate. The road to the office is long and rutted, lined with mud, thistle, and faintly suspicious stairs. You pass 3 villages. In the first, Someone hurls a turnip in your general direction. In the second, a child offers you a wildflower and asks if tax collectors are allowed to smile now. In the third, no one looks up. You are a ghost with a cart. The rooster rides up front. Its feathers are slightly puffed against the wind. It does not look back. The clerical office is made of stone and apology. It leans ever so slightly, like the documents inside have weighed it down over time. You knock, a boy answers. He is wearing ink-stained sleeves and has the fresh optimism of someone who has not yet tried to calculate the taxable value of a goose. He eyes your ledger like it might move on its own. "This is yours?" "It was." He opens it carefully. The binding groans. He flips to the center, reads aloud. "Tax waived due to regional haunting." You nod. "Spectral infestation. Bread wouldn't rise." He does not blink. He tucks the book into a shelf marked Special Cases. You are not sure if this is respect or containment. You place your quill beside it, the one with the nib chewed halfway through. You place your seal, your tally stick set, your backup inkpot. You do not place the rooster. "Anything else?" the clerk asks. You hesitate, then offer the rutabaga. "For the next one," you say. He takes it, probably thinking it's code. You leave. Your cart is now empty. You are no longer a tax collector. You are simply a man with a rooster and no official purpose. The idea of rest sounds appealing. Until you try it. You return to the only village that didn't boo you last winter. You rent a small room above a bakery. It smells of yeast and flour, and occasionally of smoke when the apprentice forgets to check the oven. The rooster adjusts quickly. It adopts the stairwell as its territory and pecks at those who climb too quickly. You begin keeping a journal, not a ledger, a journal. There's a difference, though you find yourself accidentally assigning monetary value to things anyway. Day 1, the air smells like bread. No one has yelled at me. Suspicious. Day 2, the baker gave me a biscuit. I nearly apologized by reflex. Day 3, thought about collecting turnip tax. Noticed I am not authorized. Wrote it down anyway. Your hands no longer smell like ink. They smell like dust and flour, occasionally like jam. One morning, a man from the edge of the village arrives with a small coin pouch and says, "I think I shorted you 6 years ago." You do not remember. You accept it. You use it to buy a better stool. Another day, someone brings a jar of preserves. "You didn't lie," they say, "just wrote smaller when we argued." You nod. It was true. You had been running out of room. One boy asks how to weigh barley without causing an argument. You teach him the double scoop and settle method. He tells others. Word spreads. You're not a collector anymore, but you're also not forgotten. The rooster starts receiving gifts. 1 scarf, 1 button, 1 scroll with a badly drawn chicken, and the words, "Thank you for watching." You pin it to the wall. The rutabaga, now planted in a pot, is thriving. You name it Jeffrey. You're not proud of it. You fix someone's tally stick. You are asked to read a confusing land deed. You help calculate the fairness of an ale tax proposed by a man with poor handwriting and ambitious fees. You do not report these things, you simply do them, quietly, accurately mostly. Someone knocks one night and hands you a small note. It says, "We didn't hate you, we just hated being reminded of debts." You read it twice, you burn it, but you remember it. Spring comes, the rooster molts, you do not. One afternoon, you walk to the old market square and sit on a bench. A young man is arguing with a vendor over the cost of 3 onions and an apology. You offer to mediate. No one resists. You record the event later in your journal. Resolved onion dispute. Used my serious voice. Rooster watched. Jeffrey bloomed. There is no plaque in your honor, but there are people who nod when you walk by, who remember you didn't take the last of their oats, who recall that you once blocked a pitchfork with a ledger and still returned to audit the cheese. And that, in medieval retirement terms, is legacy. One evening, as the fire cracks and the rooster sleeps with one foot stretched toward the embers, you open your journal and write one last line. Today I was not a tax collector, but I was still useful. Also, Geoffrey has 3 leaves now. You close the book. You blow out the candle. And in the darkness, the rooster makes one soft sound of approval. You are no longer recorded, but you are not forgotten. There is a peculiar hush that settles in when the ledgers close for the last time. Not dramatic, not grand, just quiet, like dust agreeing not to stir. The ink dries, the quill rests, and the world does not end. It merely forgets to argue. You wake before dawn, not from habit anymore, but from something else, something quieter than duty. It is the chill of the morning floor, the murmur of the oven downstairs, the weight of a blanket that still smells faintly of hay and bureaucratic shame. The rooster is already awake, staring at the wall like it contains ancient wisdom or a very slow insect. There are no taxes to collect today, no pigs to count, no jars of honey to judge. Your day is yours now. And naturally, you begin it by measuring water into a kettle with the precision of a man who once taxed holy grain by volume and intent. The tea is oversteeped. You drink it anyway. Outside, the world is not waiting for you. The village stirs in layers. A cartwheel squeaks. A cow protests the morning. Someone somewhere is already arguing about beans, and none of it concerns you. You sit. A long time ago, sitting meant paperwork. Now it means air. You do not count things anymore, but your mind still does. There is one rooster, one teacup, one rutabaga in the window pot, 3 spoons, 2 coins, and a handful of days that no longer require justification. Your joints creak like old floorboards. Your cloak smells faintly of onion. You no longer wear the badge of your trade. It lies folded in the bottom of a drawer with a single feather from the rooster tucked beside it. You kept it, not out of pride, out of memory. At mid-morning, someone knocks. It is a girl with a folded map and the worried look of someone who has recently misplaced a fence line. She says she was told you know how to read confusing measurements. You offer a seat. The rooster narrows its eyes. The map is a mess. North points diagonally. The ink is smug. You study it. You find the fence, or what might once have been a fence, or what someone strongly felt should be a fence. You draw a clearer line. She nods. She leaves. The rooster stretches its legs and sighs. Another knock. A baker's boy with too much dough and too few coins. You listen. You suggest he offer bread to the blacksmith in exchange for labor. You calculate the value of flour in your head and do not say it aloud. He runs off, hopeful. You do not record it, but the moment is filed somewhere in the back of your mind. Afternoon comes like spilled ink, slow, deliberate, and slightly crooked. The sun slants through your window like it's checking up on you. You move the rutabaga. It seems pleased. You do not nap. You drift. There is a difference. In your dream, a ledger writes itself. Every line is neat. No one argues. The rooster wears a crown made of hay. You wake before the ink dries. Evening arrives on time. No appointment, just presence. The air cools. The bread smell returns. The rooster clucks once, walks in a circle, and sits facing the door. You light a candle and decide, against expectation, to open your journal. You write nothing important, just impressions. Today, 2 people trusted me with their confusion. I didn't break it. Rooster sat on my foot. Geoffrey leaned west. You pause. You underline, Geoffrey. You do not name many vegetables. This one earned it. There is no one waiting to read your notes. No one demanding quarterly updates. But still, the act of writing feels like anchoring something, like proof that the day was real, even if it passed without ledgers or penalties. You remember, distantly, a fringe belief once murmured in a monastery, that a tax collector's soul is weighed not by gold or ink, but by the number of arguments they resolved peacefully without needing to use the word arrears. You're not sure anyone believed it, but it always made you feel oddly hopeful. The rooster stirs again. It walks toward the window, looks out, then looks back, as if confirming that yes, the world is still there. But it is far less interesting than this quiet room and your slow tea. You stretch, you rise. You look at the tally sticks you no longer use, resting like sleeping tools in a drawer. You consider burning them, then decide against it. Let them rest. They have served. Outside, stars are forming. The kind of night sky that looks hand-drawn, slightly uneven, oddly beautiful, entirely indifferent. You walk to the door, you open it, you step outside. The village is quiet. A single dog coughs. The wind smells like apples and smoke. Somewhere, someone is singing off-key. You smile. You do not correct them. A man once told you that being forgotten is the worst fate. He was wrong. Being remembered inaccurately is far worse. You do not want statues. You do not want a street named after you. You just want a few people to say, he tried. And maybe, he didn't take my last egg. You sit on the step. The rooster hops beside you. The moon is almost full. It shines on the ledger of the world. Fields, roofs, fences and footprints, and finds everything still in motion, but quietly so. You breathe, not deeply, just enough. No more counting, no more fearing the bishop's ink, no more weighing jam, only this moment, and then the next. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows. It's not yours. Yours just lifts its head, unimpressed, and resumes its vigil. You lean back. You let your eyes close. Tomorrow may bring another map, or a question about cheese, or it may bring nothing. Either way, you are ready. The tally is complete. The ink has dried, and the night, long and patient, settles in beside you.